Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Ultra Hope Girls. Today, we're going to be talking about Case 4 in Game 1. Just so you know, this episode will spoil
Chapter 4 of Trigger Happy Havoc.
Thanks for tuning in with us again, and we're excited to get going.
I'm Maddie.
I'm Marin.
And I'm Caroline.
And we're the Ultra Hope Girls.
1, 2.
Welcome to the Danganronpa podcast.
You're on the threshold of an amazing episode. Showtime.
Before we begin, we'd like to give a content warning about the themes of suicide contained in this chapter. If you feel symptoms of depression, anxiety, and/or suicidal thoughts or actions, please reach out to a trusted adult or peer and get the support that you need. If you do not feel you have anyone you can talk to, you can also call the suicide hotline at 1-800-273-8255. We hope that you know that the Ultra Hope Girls are sending you our love and support always. This is the case where Sakura is revealed to be the traitor and she commits suicide in an attempt to save her friends. All right, folks, we're back.
We're back, baby, with another case.
Yeah, exciting. I always love these episodes.
Yeah, these are my fave to film, I think.
Yeah, same. Always learn something new.
Yeah.
All right, so where do we want to start off?
I mean, I feel like new information, that we learn would be
Absolutely.
good.
I have a little list if you want me to. So a new floor has opened in the school. We got the 4th floor now that people can explore. There's a music room, there's a chem lab, there are also a few rooms that are still locked on the 4th floor. We find a room called the data center that is locked, and there's also the headmaster's office that people cannot get into. There's also a new rule that Monokuma adds to say that breaking down a locked door is prohibited. And as we know, prohibited things in the Danganronpa universe result in execution. So that becomes kind of a big deal. We also find a new picture, a mysterious picture of Sayaka, Celeste, and Hifumi, supposedly, hanging out, whatever, doing things in front of the windows of Hope's Peak Academy, but the windows are not boarded up. And so just like the last picture we found of Leon, Chihiro, and Mondo, we find this other suspicious picture suggesting that they somehow know each other. I thought that the way that picture was described was kind of funny because Makoto says something like, they're smiling the way you'd expect any normal teenager to smile. But the picture, if you look at the picture, Celeste is sneering and grabbing Hifumi by the eyeballs. And
it's like, yeah, they're having a grand old time.
Not a cell phone in sight.
Oh my god.
So that was kind of funny to me, but yeah.
Those pictures are really interesting, and we don't know if they're real or if Monokuma is faking them. The kids seem to think that they're faking them. But it was super interesting to me because in both pictures, all of the people included are dead. And I just wondered, do they have pictures of every grouping of people? Because, it's very convenient that the 2 pictures that have come out are people who cannot confirm or deny whether or not the picture was taken. And so I just like to think of Monokuma shuffling through his picture stack and going, yes, these are the 3 who are no longer with us.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It's it seems awfully convenient.
Something that also kind of took me by surprise when I was, playing through this next early part of chapter 4 was Hiro's hamburger abduction.
I have that as a note as well.
I was like, sir, what is going on? That is not in the anime.
It was not confirmed.
Sure. Also, the fact we learned that his house was burnt down because his dad was smoking in bed.
Yeah.
Wow. Yep.
He's got a really interesting backstory.
He kind of does.
I will say, I was not the biggest fan of Hiro in this case, and specifically in this chapter, because he calls Sakura the ogre every single time he refers to her. Not once does he give her, the benefit of recognizing her as, a person.
I know.
That was so frustrating.
It's pretty terrible.
Yeah.
I have the last thing I had on the list of new information that we find in this chapter, before we get to kind of the big reveal of the chapter, is that Alter Ego has unlocked all the files that were on the laptop. And we find out that a plan was put in place at Hope's Peak Academy to, quote, isolate the students of Hope's Peak Academy and create a communal life for them, end quote. And so the plan was for the students to supposedly live there for the rest of their lives. This plan was created by the administrators of the school because of an event that happened 1 year ago, which we was kind of alluded to before. The biggest, most awful, most tragic event in human history, aka the tragedy. And supposedly the headmaster of the school is the one who finalized this plan, could be the mastermind of the whole situation, a man in his late 30s, we learn, and is supposedly somewhere in the school as well.
Yeah, and it really, I think, points to him being the mastermind at this point. I mean, someone who they haven't met, who's controlling, or who's not controlling, but who's behind the scenes, like that is a very suspicious person, I think, in their minds, because, why is there an adult hiding somewhere in the school and not presenting themselves to the kids if they're all in this horrible situation?
Right.
Yeah. My next thing is like free time before we find out about Sakura. So because we actually just taped our interview with Jason Wishnob, I was like, you know what? Let's spend some free time with Byakuya this time.
Your beauty is beyond compare, with golden locks and skin so fair. Ooh, Byakuya Togami, Byakuya Togami.
So there are a couple things I found out in my free time with Byakuya. One is that he has had to battle 15 before for his current position, which is something that was very interesting to me because it definitely puts some perspective into how he's approaching this game. And I think a lot of his behavior in this chapter can be boiled down to that as well, which I'm sure we'll get to that later.
Absolutely.
Right.
But another thing is that his family, the way that they reproduce is they have multiple wives throughout the world that they like have children with, and it's not like a monogamous situation, it's like a polyamorous situation. And so that is good news for all of the Ultra Hope girls here, because now we can be sister wives.
Yay! Wonder how Toko's gonna feel about that.
Uh-oh. I know, I was gonna say, y'all think I want to share? I'm just kidding. But that was just kind of, I don't know, especially the 15 battle thing was very interesting to me, though.
Yes,
Yeah.
That comes into play a lot because we see in Byakuya a huge kind of shift in perspective at the end of this chapter that is like surprising, but considering where he was, like everything that he's been through in his life, all he's ever known is competition. All he's ever known is like, I have to win, I have to defeat everyone. He has never had an experience where he's had to actually work together with somebody else. And so it kind of explains how he sees this game. Like he can't wrap his head around the idea of self-sacrifice, as we learn at the end of this trial. He can't wrap his head around that because he's never seen things that way. So I have a quote from him that he says during the trial that he says, "Honeyed words like friendship don't matter here. What matters is outwitting the opponent, defeating them. Not a person alive would sacrifice themselves for another. In the end, we're all in it for ourselves." That's his perspective. But he turns out to be wrong.
This is true.
Right.
So we learn who the spy is.
Yes, we do. Sakura.
Yeah, and she, there were a couple of things that I thought were interesting about the scene where we find out Sakura is the spy. Somebody, I don't know who, I forgot to write it down, but somebody says betrayal would be met with betrayal.
It's Monokuma.
Mm-hmm. And then another, like a couple of things that make me just immediately trust her still, even though we learn this information about her, is that she admits it. She doesn't try to deny it. And they mention Sakura's, like, that something is being kept hostage, which we learn what that is later. And she is challenging the mastermind. And she says she's going to challenge them.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to go back on what I said. It's not Monokuma. Monokuma says after they come out of the bathroom or the sauna room, he says like an eye for an eye and a fang for a fang. And he's like, you do something to me, I'll do something back. And then during the trial, Makoto puts it together and he says, oh, it's a betrayal for a betrayal.
Yeah. I think too, I have written this note that just says Sakura is the motive, the victim, and the killer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's really
wow.
true.
Yeah.
Is wild.
Yeah, huh. I thought it was really interesting how everyone reacted when they found out that Sakura was the traitor, and specifically Toko, because Toko is really upset. She's very aggressive about it. She's like, I can't believe you were hiding like this from us, and she was the mastermind's lackey, and like all of this very, very strong language, considering she's doing the same thing, or she was until the last case. You know, she is Genocide Jack's lackey. She has murdered like so many people, and Sakura has never done anything violent, you know? So I thought it was really, really hypocritical of Toko to be like, wow, I'm so offended that you would keep something so big from us. Like, okay, girl. Like, I mean,
Yeah, and it's, you know, though, I mean, we often hate the things most in other people that are prominent in ourselves.
that's really
And I
true.
think this is a big case of that for her.
I
It's so
agree.
deep.
Yeah. So profound.
I
Yeah.
try. And also Hina slaps Byakuya. I actually got up and cheered. Like, I love Byakuya, but like I was like, yeah, baby.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't blame Hina for that at all, because Byakuya was being, and this is like, I think for Byakuya's personality, this is like the culmination of him being just like a total asshole. He's the worst he's ever been, I think, in this chapter, but then does like shifts at the end, but like it's like he peaks in like assholeness, like just how mean he is when he literally says like, oh, like I'd be fine with it if Sakura died, like she's just making trouble for us, like yeah, he's terrible. And then Hina slaps him, and I'm like, yeah, girl, I would get really angry too if somebody was talking about my friend that way, you know?
Right. And I think he's still playing the zero sum game. You know, he's saying
Absolutely.
there's a traitor. This game isn't fair. You know, like he even says that. He says, like, it's not fair for this to have been brought in. Now it's not a fair game. And so I think it's very, very clear how much he sees this as a game. He's not seeing it as people's lives at all. I think until the end, when he realizes that someone, you know, committed an act which has no benefit to themselves. Zero, in fact, negative, very, very negative
Yeah.
benefit to themselves. And so I think that is kind of like the thing that throws him off of that path.
True.
Yeah, because he realizes, he's like, wow, maybe I was wrong.
Right.
Self-sacrifice is a thing that people do. And I think in a way, you know, he says something along the lines of, after, this is jumping ahead, but like after he says, I changed my mind at the end of the trial, like I changed my mind, I'm not doing this killing game anymore, but don't think it's because I'm all sentimental or whatever. And I'm like, I wonder if maybe he was a little emotionally affected, because he loses his composure in the trial a lot. He starts like yelling, and he's saying like, oh my God, like what is going on? Like, why don't I understand what's going on? And I think for him, it's like such a moment of internal conflict that he doesn't know how to handle.
And
Yeah.
kind of going off of that, I have a point that I wanted to talk about, and this feels like a good segue. So Kyoko has been kind of mysterious, and we've learned bits and pieces about her personality throughout the game, but this chapter revealed a lot about her for me. And one of the things in particular is she says, it's what other people call feelings, Byakuya. And she says it twice in this chapter. She says it once before the trial, like before Sakura dies, and once at the end of the trial. And then she says not like something like not acknowledging them will come back to bite you. And the way that she says it, especially the first time, it sounds like she knows from personal experience. And so for a while, I have like, you know, there's been a similarity. Like I feel like Kyoko and Byakuya are almost two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
And Kyoko is like, you know, somebody who has learned that lesson for herself. And even though she is like, you know, not always the greatest with being sympathetic and emotional, she at least can understand them.
Right. And there's a Monokuma theater short called The Crab and the Monkey, which is referencing the short story The Crab and the Monkey, which is about a monkey who kills a crab and then is later killed in revenge by the crab's offspring. So the whole theme of, that's from Wikipedia. Thank you, Wikipedia. The whole idea of that story is like kind of justice. kind of bringing a crime to light. And I think that there are two different ways that that story of the crab and the monkey can be fit into this case. And the first comes up here because Kyoko is saying, like, you need to be really careful because it's going to come back and bite you in the butt.
I think that is so interesting, and I love that you have brought in like the Monokuma theater aspect to it, because every time I see those I'm like, what do these mean? Like, is there some deeper meaning? And I've never been able to find one, so kudos to you. But
Thank you.
I agree with you, Caroline, that I think she's speaking from personal experience and that she learned that lesson the hard way, because she seems kind of like a more cold and distant person, and she doesn't seem to be the most empathetic. I mean, even when she's interacting with Alter Ego in this chapter, it's like, yeah, sure, Alter Ego's a computer, but Kyoko is so blunt. Like, she's like, when Alter Ego's asking, like, oh, what happened to, like, Hifumi and Taka? She's just like, she types them, like, they're all dead. And then, like, it's really sad. But I think that something has happened in her past to make her learn that she can't always be that, like, cold and emotionless person, because the people around her are not emotionless. She has to understand other people's feelings.
Right. There's actually a line when they're talking to AI. Hiro says, friendship has no survival value. Instead, it gives value to survival. And then it's silent, and Kyoko's like, anyways.
Remember that part?
It's so funny. And Hiro's like, hey, give me credit, man.
I remember that.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I had, as far as, like, I think a big theme of this chapter is the idea of, like, pride and arrogance and assuming that you're right, and how that can lead you really wrong. And I think Byakuya is a really good example of this in this chapter, but I think Kyoko is a little bit as well. And Kyoko was like my absolute favorite character the first time I played this. I was like, I love her. She's perfect. I love her. Playing through this a second time, I realized how deeply flawed of a character she is. Like, she's really mean to Makoto in this chapter.
Right.
And, like, she gets to be, I mean, she kind of gets on her high horse a little bit because she's so smart and she knows that she's smart, and that's great. Like, she can solve the mysteries. But there's also something that stood out to me in the fact that when they discover Sakura's body and she explains, like, the 4 possibilities of the locked room murder, she doesn't at first realize that there is a 5th possibility, which was suicide. And I think that she honestly has some pride as well that kind of prevented her from seeing that at first. And later she does get it. Like, she catches on during the trial, like, she knows what happened. But Byakuya is so in his own world of just absolute, like, exudes pride. And he's like, I can't be wrong. I'm always right. And that leads him to the wrong decision. And so Byakuya, I think, exemplifies that kind of, like, the moral of the story really well. But, like, playing back through the game, I'm like, Kyoko's not perfect. She exemplifies that a little bit too, because she has a lot of Byakuya-like traits that I think played out in kind of a similar way for her. So I just thought that was interesting as well.
Yeah. And I think that part of the reason that Byakuya and Kyoko missed that possibility of it not being a murder, but instead being a suicide, might be because of how suicide is viewed in Japan. There are really high rates of suicide in Japan to this day.
Yeah.
And suicide can be seen as, like, an honorable death if you're doing it, like, on the battlefield, or if you're doing it to not get caught, or if you're doing it, but because of that, I think it can affect the way that people view it in Japan and in Japanese culture. And so I think it's important to know, like, that's a very serious thing, no matter where you are. But in Japan, it's viewed a little bit differently. And I think that because Byakuya and Kyoko might not have been seeing it as an honorable way to go, they're thinking, like, suicide would be dishonorable. And so they don't consider it because it's just not possible. Like, it's,
Yeah, no, that is interesting. Yeah, in Japan, especially for Japanese men, particularly, yeah, it's a huge problem there. Like, the rates are very, very high because of, like, a lot of cultural reasons.
Yeah, and if you're a listener and if you know more about this topic, like, let us know. Talk to us on Facebook, talk to us on Twitter. Yeah.
We're always wanting to learn more. Before we find Sakura's body, Alter Ego decides to sacrifice himself, essentially, to find more information by being manually hooked up to the school's network, which they do by putting him in a locked closet. They're the closet in the boys' bathroom, I think on the second floor. And someone describes it, quote, as basically suicide. I think it might be Kyoko.
Makoto, I think.
Makoto, okay. Which is an interesting segue into the case itself.
Yeah, it's like Sakura's not the only one who sacrificed themselves this chapter.
Right. And I actually have on here, like, what is the difference between an AI and a human? Because there is a pretty big discussion between Makoto and AI. It depends on whether you're watching the anime or the game for who's there for the conversation. But everyone's kind of like, wow, AI, like, you're our friend. We trust you, you know, like, we hope you escape with us. And it's a computer, you know, it is not a person, but it has programmed feelings, you know, and it's making decisions, it's looking for answers, it's improving. And so it brings up the question of how can you differentiate between an AI and a person?
A good question. And I don't know if it's a question that anyone can answer, really.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Westworld, actually.
Which I need to watch.
Oh, it's such a good show. I highly recommend it.
All right, everybody, we're just going to take a quick break. But before we do, we just want to let you know that we have a couple of places that you can show support outside of just listening to us. We have a Patreon where you can sponsor for as low as $2 a month. So definitely check that out. And it's very helpful, you know, with us creating the podcast to have your support in that way. We are also on Twitter. We're on Facebook, Ultra Hope Girls Podcast. You'll find us, follow us, and we're always updating stuff on there. And we have an Amino, which is pretty awesome, and you can follow us on there. And if you have a question, let us know. Leave us a voicemail. The link is in the description for both the Patreon and the voicemail, and we will be back after the break.